Good morning and welcome to today's program, Recruiting in the New Economy. This event is brought to you by the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition and our partners at Aerotek. First, I want to confirm that everybody can hear us okay and see the screen. Just type yes in the question field if you are all set there. Great, thank you. You can also use the same question field to ask questions at any time during the program. Just type your question in the webinar dashboard, and we will address those to our speakers here today. Also on your dashboard, or under the Handout tab, is a copy of today's program and a list of upcoming PNDC events. Feel free to download those. We are delighted to have both Amy Jeffers, Account Manager with Aston, Aerotek's Accounting and Finance Recruiting Division, and Tiffany Bilodeau, Senior Account Manager with Aerotek's Engineering Division, joining us here today. And thanks to Aerotek for helping PNDC members address these pressing workforce issues. In this presentation, Amy and Tiffany will take a look at the effects of the Northwest's booming economy on recruiting and how to set yourself apart from your competition. The challenges in the market allow for some healthy dialogue around your competitive advantages as an organization, retaining top talent, and understanding the talent pipeline walking through the door. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'll turn things over to Amy and Tiffany to begin the presentation.
Great, thanks so much, Kate. This is Tiffany Bilodeau, and I'm going to kick us off here. We're really appreciative of the PNDC for inviting us to speak on this topic. I think it's very timely. And Amy Jeffers here joins me. Amy is a new voice to the PNDC. We have been proud members of this organization going on 7 years now, and this is our second webinar following up on the War for Talent webinar we did last year. So we're looking forward to taking this topic to the next level and talking a little bit more about how companies can really set themselves apart as they are competing for top talent in this war for talent. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Amy, who's going to get us started.
Great. Thank you all, and I'm excited to talk with you guys about this topic. This is a presentation that speaks really near and dear to me and obviously our organization in terms of the industry we spend our time in, but also in terms of the partnerships we look at with supporting our clients and companies all over the Portland metro area, and really discussing and paying attention to what's happening in the market right now. Tiffany and I have both been with the company for about 10 years. I'm almost at 10 years, and she's just a little bit farther along than me. So we have watched the economy go through a lot of different changes, transitions, and, well, quite frankly, highs and lows in 10 years. And in the last year, we've seen things that most companies hadn't seen before, even pre-economy. And so that's how this presentation really got started. I was working with the Clackamas Chamber of Commerce last year in 2016 to put together a presentation, this presentation, I guess to be specific, talking about what is going on in this economy right now. And as companies are looking at hiring, most of which are looking at growing their workforce, some are looking at hiring to battle attrition, some are really looking at succession planning. The conversation of what happened in this talent market, what's going on, really started to percolate in these conversations in a way that made me want to get out there and start sharing the information about the market with you all. So that being said, that's how we got here today. So the topic of the conversation is, why does talent matter? And many of you probably have your own answers to this, but our future does depend on this talent evolution. Our business success depends on talent attraction, and even more so on talent retention. So let's talk a little bit about what the landscape does look like right now. A rocky recruiting landscape. I like the visual on this one. As you guys can see, it's a little bit rocky in the background. So 83% of executives believe that attracting and retaining talent is an issue in their company. It's a very high number. They know that this is important. I mean, that's essentially what this says without getting into a lot of specifics. The second number there, 51% of companies have open positions for which they can't find quality candidates. I'm sure that for most of you that have decided to join this conversation today, this probably feels at home to you. Maybe 51% seems low, but quality talent candidates and getting to the talent pipeline right now is definitely something that is felt on a widespread issue. So let's talk about what's next with that. What does the market look like? The makeup in the market right now is interesting. I think that this really will give us an opportunity. I'll stem the rest of the conversation today from more or less these three buckets. The first bucket here, and well, I guess I should say, what's happening right now specific to the market isn't just Portland, but Portland is in this position right now where our economy is doing better than most economies across the country. We're in a growing city. We have a very strong market of candidates that are moving in and taking their foothold into the Portland economy in a way that a lot of other cities maybe aren't experiencing. So these numbers and what I'm about to go into are not necessarily specific to Portland, but just think in terms of what you're seeing in Portland, maybe even enhancing these numbers. So in general, one of the major things that's changed in the market is a much more passive job seekers market. 70% of the workforce is passive, meaning that they're not actively applying to positions, that their feelers are maybe out there, or that they're open to hearing about the right opportunity if something comes up, but there is not an assertive or aggressive initiative for them to look for the next job. And below that, 50% of candidates or people with their feelers out there go to their friends and colleagues to discover new opportunities first. So what that means for you is that at least 50% of the candidates that you're used to seeing apply to your job postings are not coming through a traditional network. They're either getting into companies through friends or their network, or they're coming to you through some type of networking resource, whether that even be recruiters or things like that. But it's not the traditional post a job and get the applicants. That's not the market we're living in right now.
And as a result, our recruiters have really had to change their recruiting strategies for being able to tap into this talent, and that's when relationship-based recruiting has really come into play here because, we too aren't seeing as many candidates apply to our postings as we have in the past, and so our recruiters are really, responsible for building relationships with candidates and cataloging their backgrounds and their goal, skills, and interests accordingly, so that we're able to, job match those candidates when the right opportunity comes up, as opposed to having a position and then reactively recruiting on it. That is, not as much of the game anymore as it once was.
Absolutely. And another thing that has changed the game on this is online. Recruiting in terms of what it looks like to be online is very different today than it was pre-recession. 60% of talent turn to online job boards or social networks when seeking new opportunities. Just think in terms of the evolution of each of your careers, what LinkedIn has done or what it has meant in terms of that progression. We're dealing with social media and a share economy in a way that very much changes the way our conversations look, not just in how candidates or talent is coming to us, but also in terms of how that conversation translates from a professional versus a casual conversation, the way resumes are worded, cover letters, do those even exist anymore? When you get a text about a potential opening, should you be alarmed or should you be honored? There's a lot of different ways that the online presence has changed the market and changed the way that we're conversating with candidates in terms of how they're coming to us. And lastly, 4 generations in the workforce. This certainly not necessarily new right this minute, but is something that in the last couple of years has made a major difference in terms of how companies are thinking about their workforce and their culture. A lot of conversation and a lot of emphasis on millennials coming into the workforce and what that means for the other 3 generations. But there are other things, I will touch on the millennials as we go, but there are other things that contribute to the 4 generations mindset. This is the first time in history that we have had a significant portion of dual income families working. And when that transition happened, what also happened was a very different conversation around work-life balance. It's not just millennials that are bringing that conversation to the plate. It's families that have both parents working by choice and that are wanting balance to be able to make that work. And then the last bullet point on here is succession planning. Companies looking at how are we going to handle recruitment once our baby boomers are moving out of the workforce. We have a very strong percentage of people that are near retirement. What happens as we get closer and closer to that? How set up is your company to handle that transition? Great. So moving on, war for talent. As the workforce tightens, companies will need to change their recruitment strategies to stay competitive. These are a few of the things that we think are playing some of the biggest and most impactful differences in terms of how a company can stay competitive, or kind of what things that companies need to pay attention to in this market. The economy by no means is going to slow down in the immediate future. So what we're really looking at is that this is a very competitive market that is candidate driven, meaning they have options. They do get to be a little bit picky right now. It is not an employer's market anymore. And most of you, I would guess, have probably seen this or felt this to some degree. So the second thing here is that in order to get to that talent, as that talent is less and less, you have to cast as wide of a net as possible to ensure that you're getting the best talent, not just the first talent that comes through the door, but the best talent. So thinking outside of the box in terms of how you get to that talent is critical. And the companies that are able to get creative are the ones that are getting to the talent, the best talent, the fastest, and are making that work for their organization. The third thing being employee satisfaction. This has been a major change in the last 5 years. Your employee satisfaction is very trackable. For those of you that have ever looked at Glassdoor, Glassdoor.com, you know that reviews and information that you want and don't want is available. And that means that everybody has access to see really what it means to work at your organization. That's something that companies are learning that they need to pay attention to, and the ones that are getting ahead of this and really addressing it are making the biggest traction in terms of making sure that they're having the right conversations with the right people. The fourth thing, culture matters. Culture matters to the candidates, and culture matters right now even more to clients, to companies, I should say, to hiring managers. And it's not all about kegerators. I will address this, a little bit more in the slides ahead, but paying attention to the satisfaction of the employee is one thing, but do people like coming to work every day? Do they feel safe? Do they feel valued? Do they feel like they get what they want out of the role, whatever that may be to them, specific to culture? And the last thing, time kills all deals. In recruiting, we live and die by the saying, but for companies, hiring managers, they are feeling this as well. With a market that's competitive, we don't have time to wait on a candidate that is in front of you that may have other opportunities just to see what else is out there. Knowing that if you find the talent that you like, that you need to move or at least be willing to compete is a major change in the last 2 years that companies haven't quite put their finger on in terms of how to address it and how to stay competitive. So we will talk a little bit more about that.
We have an audience question here. Can you provide some examples of what you mean by thinking outside the box for recruiting?
Forecasting the wider net.
Yeah.
So a couple of things on this specifically that I've seen companies start to tackle is using different means of social media to get to candidates. So not just using LinkedIn, but using things like Facebook, using things like Instagram. So the social media aspect in that could absolutely help. The other thing that we're seeing a lot is the partnerships between different associations, organizations, networks, the universities, the community colleges, and using them to leverage the talent market. And the other thing I would say is if you are in a position to be able to do things like job fairs or internships, things that get people walking through the door to really see you for who you are and create as much transparency as possible, create significant buy-in and attraction on the other side. Those would be some of my thoughts right off the bat. Tiffany, anything you would add?
No, I think that's a good list.
Yeah. Good. Okay. There are more. I like the questions. This is the first time that I've done a webinar like this, so it feels a little bit nerve-wracking to not see your guys' faces and to just be talking to a phone. But I assume you're all smiling. And I wore bright colors for you today, just in case you were wondering. All right. So let's talk about the takeover, as I like to call it. Not just the millennial takeover, but it just felt like it made a lot of sense in terms of this. So the first stat here. 53% of hiring managers surveyed said that they had difficulty finding and retaining millennials. Not surprising, because millennials are using a lot of alternative means to get to the jobs that they're finding. So they're not the ones that are applying to job postings on the regular, but they are the ones that are using things like social media, like LinkedIn. They're using their friends. They're using their parents, their aunts and uncles who are also in the workforce. So that it is harder to get them, and it is hard to retain them. So a couple other things here just to know, to add on that. By 2025, some of you have probably heard this stat, but it is projected that millennials will comprise 3/4 of the workforce. By 2020, it's supposed to be already 50%, and we're seeing that change a little bit with the way the baby boomers are staying in the workforce a little bit longer. But the point is that they are taking over. So they are going to be there, by and large, taking up the majority of the seats in most organizations. So dealing with that as a reality is really important. 41% of baby boomers think that workers should stay with an employer for at least 5 years before looking for a new job. Let's say that again. 41% of baby boomers think that workers should stay with an employer for at least 5 years before looking for a job. Now, if you're on this call and you have any type of recruiting background or hiring background, to find candidates that are staying in a job for 5 years is like a gold mine right now. So it's interesting.
Limited gold mine.
Yeah. Only 13% of millennials agree with that 5 years is a good amount of time to stay with a job. Most of you have probably heard the stats that a millennial will have 8 different careers in their lifetime, and a 2 to 3 year tenure for a millennial is pretty good. So that's very, very different than the people that are sitting in the hiring seats think in terms of what good tenure and good quality look like. There's a mismatch there in terms of what's valued as well as what is important when you're looking at talent. Is tenure something that is absolutely critical in terms of your hiring decisions? That may be something you'll want to take a look at. The fourth bubble, I guess, millennials want to empower others. 40% said it was their biggest motivator for becoming a leader. I think a lot about the Simon Sinek interview. I don't know if you have seen this. If not, certainly recommend looking into it. The Millennials in the Workforce interview, where he talks about specific things that millennials are motivated by. This being one of them, that they want a job that offers them purpose and that offers them development. Those are the 2 things that matter most to a millennial when they're searching for their next career opportunity. And those things, I think, are values for most people in general, but it's very different in terms of this age group or this workforce group, because they are making decisions based on those alone. Does this job allow me to give purpose back into the community? Yes or no? Does this job allow me to develop myself? Yes or no? And less important than ever are things such as 401k, what does their benefits look like? That's not on their radar in the way that it has been for other generations coming into the workforce. And it may not be what you need to attract in terms of making sure that you're getting those talents, getting that talent in the door. So the next bucket is saying 3 factors that you should highlight in a millennial to get them to accept the job. Number 1, compensation package. So it may sound contrary because I did say 401k. To millennials, 401k is not part of a compensation package often that is important to them. But what is important? Holiday, vacation time, work-life balance, their pay. Those are the things they're looking at in the compensation package that are maybe less total package than what we're used to, but being able to speak to that and know that that's something they're going to be looking at right off the bat can certainly get a candidate interested and can be what can make the difference for them closing the deal. The second thing, professional development. Is there opportunity for them to work on getting better? That often looks like maybe mentorship, trainings, compensation for continued education, seminars, trainings that are external to the organization, all of that. So if your company offers any of those things, make sure that you're getting that front facing to each candidate that walks through the door. It's very important, not just probably for millennials, for everybody, but making sure you're using that as something to highlight when you're getting a selling tool. Yeah. And the last thing, opportunities for advancement. I've heard many, many times from clients that have said that a millennial coming in the midst of their interview asked how soon they could be promoted. Well, that may just be a conversation we get used to. And it may not be that they're looking for advancement in 6 months, but they do want to know, where are we going? Where am I going? And what would be my mission here? If we want candidates to stay in a job for more than 2 or 3 years, we need to be able to paint a picture to them as to what those 2, 3 to 5 years really look like, or be willing to be okay with the fact that that person walking in will eventually be looking for something else, and in 2 to 3 years may move on. So it's kind of a pick your battle thing on this. Some companies are really okay with the idea that I'll get this talent in the door, I'll get 2 to 3 great years out of them, and then they're going to move on. And some companies are able to really look at this and say, I can build a 5 to 7, maybe 10-year strategy for this candidate if they have the right potential. And so choosing which path you go down is obviously dependent on your organization standing or what you have available to you, and both I think are very valid, but making sure that you know that that conversation is at the forefront when stepping into the conversation when it comes to getting to the point of making an offer. Great. All right. So networking. Networking is in a very different spot, as I've mentioned, now than ever, now more than ever. In the current labor market, job seekers cannot afford to ignore the possibilities presented by networking. The ability to network efficiently or effectively could differentiate a highly skilled worker from a mediocre one. What this means to me, and one thing that we say often at Aerotek, is good talent is going to lead you to good talent. Good people know good people. So when I think about casting that wide net, one of the things that I think can really help a company accelerate in times of growth is to use the network you have internally. How many of the people that you work alongside or that make up the company right now are being an advocate for you out in the community? How many of them are bringing in referrals? How many of them are posting great things about your organization? How many of them are you using as a branding tool? That being said, on the other side, from a candidate standpoint, watching that is if they're getting their information through these tools, don't you want to control what information is being presented to them? I have talked to a lot of clients, Tiffany and I both, who, based on transition post-recession, have gone through maybe ups and downs that have been, sometimes great for their reputation and sometimes very challenging for their reputation. And as much as we try to be advocates for our clients and the candidate conversations we're having, the biggest difference is when your internal employees are being advocates for you and are helping reshape that branding, regardless of where your current standing is from a reputation standpoint. Everybody went through hard times. Well, most everybody went through hard times when the downturn happened. And some companies are still struggling in times right now. So this is something that I think a lot of companies maybe aren't able to or haven't spent the time paying attention to, and leveraging that your culture and your internal employees can be the biggest and best branding advantage that each of you have. So moving on to the next slide, one of the things that I wanted to kind of kick off but leave you with kind of an assignment going from here is around building your brand. I think that in a market where candidates have options, from the moment you get on the phone with a candidate, the first response you have, whether that be a phone call or a response email, that your brand is determining how engaged that candidate is going to be through the process. I have seen candidates go through several stages of interviews and multiple steps in the process, with our assumption or the belief or it looking like they're very engaged. And in reality, something happened in that first conversation that they kind of knew or were hesitant on, and they wanted to feel it out. But at the end, that first impression really did end up weighing on what decision they made when it came down to one offer versus another. So getting you thinking about how you're building your brand, a couple different questions that I wanted to put out there for you to think about. If you have a candidate in front of you that you know is interviewing at 2 or 3 of your competitors, what is it that you're using as your competitive differentiators? This can look like a lot of different things. This can be culture. This could be a kegerator. Absolutely could be a kegerator. It could be the aesthetics of your work environment. It could be alternative work schedules. It could be your impact in the community, that you offer paid community service hours. It could also be that you have a growth plan over 5 years that you can talk about in a way that makes somebody excited about not just what it looks like today, but what it looks like as they're coming along for this journey as well. For us, internally at Aerotek, we battle this as well. There's a lot of recruiting firms, there's a lot of companies hiring, and we're all kind of bidding for the same talent. And for us, what we really talk about when it comes to competitive differentiators is culture, absolutely, but we also talk about training, that we are going to make you the best person you can be and live up to that potential by the amount of training that we're going to give you and the hands-on development that you'll get by working in our team. So that's just an example of one thing, but thinking about this for you specifically, your team specifically, what is it that differentiates you from your competitors? The second thing, how will you sell and market yourself? Have this in mind. If you haven't thought about this before walking into an interview, even having like a little mini script or elevator speech of what it is that you want to get across to sell why this person should want to work with you. And when you're thinking about that last bullet point there is it's not just why somebody wants to work with your organization, right? That's easy. You can come up with a lot of things as to why somebody wants to work at X, Y, and Z company. But what's really important is you in front of them. Why would this person want to work with you specifically? Why do they want to be a part of your team? What do you have to offer as a manager, as a recruiter, as a principal, whatever role you're in? Why does this person want to work with you? And having that on point as you're going through this interview process makes a major difference in terms of their engagement, but it also just lets them know that you care enough to sell them. And sometimes in recruiting, you have to play to the ego. And this is a great way for you to play to their ego by leveraging your benefits. All right. So I wanted to give a couple of things here, some tangible pieces to kind of get to the point here where it's not just about attracting talent, right? You have to actually get them to want to work for you and get them to accept the job offer. So these were a couple of things that I thought were important in terms of once you're in that interview stage to really help win the interview. The people you do not hire have just as much influence on your company's reputation and talent brand as those who do join your team. So this goes back to a major change in the market, that your reputation is bigger than your webpage. So the candidates that have a negative experience interviewing with your company are a direct result, or can be a direct result on what comes through in terms of additional referrals or what that network or reputation can be. It's the same as restaurant reviews. One person who has a bad experience is going to talk to 5 to 7 people, whereas one person who has a positive experience is only going to share that with 1 to 2 people. So you really want to make sure that the negative influence that you're having is as minimal as possible. And that comes in terms of how you engage from the very beginning. If you have job postings up and candidates are applying, are they getting a response? If they're not getting a response, know that they want a response and that risk point may be that they see that as a negative experience with your brand. So any response oftentimes is better than no response. If they come in and the experience doesn't go, the job wasn't as it was described, or they were, in their first conversation maybe over the phone, and then when they walked through the door, the candidate felt like it was oversold, or the culture wasn't as great as the person on the phone made it seem. Those are all things that can negatively influence, but also a great opportunity for you to know, be realistic, be transparent, and make sure that the candidates know what they're getting into, so that when they walk through the door, those expectations are met. 83% of talent say that a negative interview experience can change their mind about a role or company they once liked. So this one position that this candidate is interviewing for, if that doesn't go well, may turn them off from any and all positions going forward. Even the best of companies with the best brand awareness don't necessarily have the best reputation when it comes to the experience of the candidate going through the interview. So just know that, be aware of that, and think about your process and how you can make sure to minimize those risks. Good news is always most impactful when delivered in person. Make your candidates feel special by extending your job offers over the phone or in person. The days of email being the way to keep engagement and to express enthusiasm are dwindling. So this was something that came up over and over again when I was doing the research for this presentation, of just the personal influence that we have to win that job offer or to win that candidate over really makes a difference. And this oftentimes means not just coming from HR. The hiring manager that is this person's going to be working under, getting that call and extending that offer from them personally has made a significant difference in whether or not somebody does decide to take that offer over another. So just know that, use that if you can, or put that into your opportunities of improvement, when it comes to the interview process. But use your compelling sell. Going back to the branding page, this is the time to really close them out and sell them on why they should want to come work for you. Great. All right. So last but not least, screening, finding the talent, what that means for you. This is, I'll give the stats first. 65% of hiring managers say they discovered a misleading or embellished statement on a resume. 43% of organizations say they discovered a new hire did not have the skills they claimed over the last 6 months. So I think about this all the time. This, I feel like, is the world I live in that with candidates having so many options right now, they are interviewing quite a bit, which means they're very well rehearsed, they're very well coached, and are showing up to you as what probably looks like most times an A candidate. It's hard to tell an A candidate from a B candidate right now. Absolutely is. Even for us. I've been doing this 10 years, and things sneak through the cracks because of the opportunities that they have to get better. So knowing that in terms of how you address your interview strategy or your screening strategy can really differentiate from a bad hire and a longer interview process if needed. The next slide, I go into a little bit more around interview techniques and top talent, and behavioral interviewing being really the best opportunity for you to hear a candidate walk you through their experience in a way that is tangible, but more than that, it's a way to get an understanding of something very untangible when it comes to a resume, and that's their mindset and their attitude. How do they really think? How do they really think as a person? How do they problem solve? How do they use resources? These questions are geared to get at those things behind the questions, not necessarily the content of the answer. Is this person somebody that takes ownership of their mistakes? Can you hear that in the way they articulate their answer? Is this somebody that has a team-oriented attitude or somebody that likes to be an individual contributor? Which of those attitudes is important to that role? For us, this is an opportunity for us to really make sure that as we're talking to candidates, that we're validating what's on their resume, yes, and that they can do what their resume says they can do. But more than that, that their rehearsed answers maybe are more about a script and less about them being truly convicted about how they feel about something, how they handle an issue, or how they would respond given a challenge. We talk a lot about grit in our organization. Grit is something that's really hard to measure in terms of their background or their experience and a resume, but it is absolutely something you can measure when you have a candidate walk you through a challenging situation they've been in or a time where they've faced adversity. And getting into the things that really emphasize attitude or emphasize mindset or culture fit will allow for you, hopefully, to get to a place where you know this candidate is a strong fit, not just by resume or potential embellishment there, but that you're not letting them control from a standpoint of selling you on why they're a great candidate. You get to hear from them and how they think that will make you know that they are a great candidate.
Yeah, I think something worth mentioning here too is, of course, reference checks are a very valuable tool within the interview process, right? Being able to speak with candidates, previous supervisors, and validate the work that they did, how they showed up every day, what their strengths and weaknesses were. But as the industry changes, fewer and fewer companies are allowing for reference checks and having policies against them, and they'll only validate, or verify the dates of employment, and sometimes may not even make a comment as to whether or not the candidate is rehireable or not. So using behavioral interviewing techniques like this, I think, is so important because it allows you to get to a deeper level with the candidates as opposed to just talking through their resume and getting examples of their previous work experience. When you may not be able to get as in-depth reference checks as maybe once was a possibility, but that's something that we have definitely felt within our organization, having to take our screenings deeper because we're not able to rely on reference checks as much as we once were because they just aren't always possible to complete based on companies' individual policies.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen change recently in the last couple of years, maybe more the last year around this topic, is managers asking for candidates to add their key accomplishments to their resumes. I don't even remember that being a thing 10 years ago, but now more and more companies are wanting to see, all right, like you have these bullet points of actual things that you've done, but what does that mean and what have you accomplished by doing those things? So as we're, coaching candidates and talking to them about what makes them stand out from other candidates, it's really trying to hone in on the things that they can speak to that are tangible about what they did to impact an organization, what accomplishment they had in that role. And that can be everything from something that financially impacted revenue or was change management related or a special project that they ran that went successfully. We see it in a lot of different ways, but that is definitely a change that, as somebody that may be doing interviews, is to ask for candidates to really walk you through what those key accomplishments are and get those responses in a way that maybe they aren't as prepared to answer or aren't as scripted on, that maybe other companies have asked them, and get a more genuine response, I think. Great. So the last slide here, many of you have probably heard of the WIFM. If not, then it stands for What's in It for Me. And I put this slide as the closing slide because in reality, everybody's asking themselves this. The candidates are asking themselves, what's in it for me? The managers are asking themselves, what's in it for me? And each side maybe isn't thinking about how to answer it for the other person. But I challenge you to think about this in terms of both angles. If you were a candidate sitting across from you and they had this thought, what's in it for me? How would you respond? And if you yourself sitting there are thinking with this candidate in front of you, what's in it for me with this person? Getting yourself to the place where you're able to ask that or confirm what that answer should be, knowing what that answer should be, will give you the security and the transition point of knowing that this person may be the right fit or maybe the top talent that you're looking for. But don't be afraid going into, your recruitment or going into your growth to be a little bit selfish and asking and wanting to know with each candidate that comes through the door, what would be in it for me to hire you? What would be in it for me to have you on this team? It's a fair and a valid question right now, and it is a question that will indicate, for you and for us as well, what is this person's intentions, what would be the role that they would give, and is this somebody that I really want on my team going forward for the long haul? So that's where I leave it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. We do have some additional audience questions here. We don't have time. Yeah. Can you give an example? You had mentioned using your current staff to help outreach. Can you give an example of somebody that's maybe turned around the culture, maybe from something that was kind of negative to getting these employees being fans out in the community about attracting other people?
Yeah, we'll see if this answers the question fully. So whoever asked it, please feel free to follow up with additional questions if I don't knock this out of the park for you. But I have been working with a client in particular that has had a negative reputation lately in the market. They just, had an unfortunate thing happen, and so as a result, anytime you Google their name, that incident is the first thing that comes up. And so, that is something that, is very, something that, candidates will discover quickly when interviewing with this particular company. And so it's something that this company has, been very proactive about, and it's something that they have spent a lot of time talking through with us as their advocates, and talking through, the reasons that these things happened, what has since, been put in place to prevent something like this happening again in the future, and what their plan is moving forward and how they forecast things to change for the better. And so it's something that we've really been, addressing with candidates through the interview process with them. And then when the candidates do, go through the interview with the company directly, the company has been very upfront about addressing those issues and wanting to, talk through it and have good dialogue about it, allow the candidate to ask questions so that they can feel very comfortable knowing, where the company stands with that issue right now. And I think that's been really important, and it has really helped to turn their reputation around, and we have yet to come into a situation where a candidate has declined an offer or has wanted to withdraw from consideration due to, finding out about this incident. But because the company has been so forthcoming about it and wanting to, really address it and talk through it with candidates and talk through how they're changing and how they want the candidate to be a part of that change, it's been a really positive experience for people, and we've been able to successfully place candidates with this company since this thing happened. So that's one example I can provide. Like I said, I hope that answers the question. But if not, please, let us know.
Well, to build on that and just summarize, whether it be a situation where a company has gone through transition or has seen a significant amount of attrition or has had something that has negatively impacted their brand, I think my advice would always be to be as transparent and proactive as possible when addressing the issue, and more so allowing yourself and your internal employees to control the messaging. If that transparency gives you a huge benefit or a leg up in controlling the messaging from that first interaction to ensure that you're moving through the relationship with as much honesty as possible.
Great. Another question here. How can you go through some of the, looks like you're asking what services does Aerotek provide, and how can they kind of engage with you if they're needing help in recruiting?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that question. So Aerotek is a professional recruiting firm. We have 9 different divisions that specialize within different industries and niches. So, for example, my division is engineering. Amy is accounting and finance. In addition to these divisions, we have a manufacturing division that specializes in production skill sets, skilled trades, etc. We have a scientific division that specializes within lab professionals, as well as an energy division, an aviation division, and so on. So if your company is interested in recruiting help or want to know what that looks like more, please reach out to either Amy or myself. Even if it's not within our respective divisions, we'll get you in touch with the right folks. But Aerotek as a company provides contract to hire, and direct placement recruiting. So depending on what it is that you're after, we would definitely be happy to talk through that with you and get you in touch with the right rep and the right industry to serve you.
Great. Thank you both for joining us here today. Really appreciate you lending your expertise to PNDC as always, and such a good support to our organization. And thank you for all our attendees that have joined us here today. Don't forget, PNDC does have some additional upcoming events here in the next few weeks. Our annual Aerospace and Defense Symposium will be May 4th, and that's on base at Joint Base Lewis McChord. We'll have a peer-to-peer exporting compliance roundtable, an opportunity to talk to peers that are facing ITAR and EAR compliance issues. That will be May 10th in downtown Portland at Ader Wynn's office. You can also join that via phone. And we will have another webinar on May 16th, an alternative to layoffs, hosted by Oregon WorkShare, which should be an exciting program. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much to Amy Jeffers and Tiffany Bilodeau, our wonderful presenters. The webinar has now ended.